Hey. I'll just get someone to check in and make sure that you can all hear me. Live streaming is always a bit interesting. Someone give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear me. Sweet, that's good to know. Good to know. Sweet, we've already got 9 people. Oh, thanks for everyone checking in. It's really helpful because now I can sign you off and you get your ticket into the draw for the Greece trip. So I'm just going to go through and start signing some people off so I know that you're here. Gotcha, Lawrence. Awesome. We've got 12 people here already. If you could just drop your first name in the chat if your YouTube name doesn't match the name that will be on your booking. If it does match, I've already got you. If it doesn't match, can you just quickly type in your first name so I make sure I can tick you off and you go in the draw for a trip to Greece on behalf of Sony. Sweet, there we go, a few more people. Christoph, beautiful. Yeah, I just want to make sure that everyone gets their ticket in. Be ashamed to miss out on an extra chance to go. Chase, gotcha. I'll do this again a couple of times throughout the live stream in case people kind of check in, check out, or the dodgy internet connection and things like that. That way, I make sure I get everyone. Just going through. Sweet. That might be almost everyone for now, but I'll check in again as we get stuck into it. All right. Thanks everyone for coming. I hope you're really excited to learn a little bit about Antarctica and a little bit about my trip. If you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to just leave them in the comments and I can see them live while I'm doing my thing here in the back end. And I should see them come through on YouTube as well. There'll be time for Q&A at the end, but firstly, I'll probably just introduce myself in case you don't already know me. My name's Clyde. I'm a Sony digital imaging advocate, and I was lucky enough to go to Antarctica for almost a full month, which is really exciting. Rule number 1 for the rest of the live stream is it's Antarctica, not Antarctica, because there's so many people that leave that C out in the middle. It's Antarctica, and I can't even say it properly. Antarctica. That's how a lot of people from the States will call it, and it's wrong. It's Antarctica. If there's anyone who speaks Spanish, obviously, and the top of Antarctica is very close to Argentina. So if you're Argentinian or speak Spanish or Portuguese, it's Antártida with a D. So it's my personal favorite thing now to call it Antártida because that's how it would be pronounced if you're in Argentina. All right, can I get a thumbs up if we're ready to go and people are itching to get stuck into it? There's a bit of a delay. I say stuff and then it happens like 5 seconds later. Yeah, big clapping hands from Lawrence. Thanks very much. All right, so the first question you're probably asking is, how do you get there? I was lucky enough that Sony asked me to go as part of a partnership they have with Intrepid Travel. So Intrepid are one of the operators down in Antarctica, operating expedition ships in that area. So I submitted a body of work and Intrepid were nice enough to say, yep, that's exactly what we're looking for. We'd love to have you down on the ship. So I went for approximately 1 month from the end of February to about the end of March. And that for me, luckily, was whale season. So I hadn't actually never photographed humpbacks before, but I've been told that later end of the season being the southern hemisphere's summer, that's the optimal time to go because you get lots of whales, but then also you get all the penguin activity and there's less sea ice to navigate. I'll just reiterate again, thanks everyone so much for coming. If I haven't got your name already, I'll make sure I tick everyone off at the end. But obviously by attending this event, you go in the draw to win a trip to Athens and Santorini, which would be absolutely awesome. And it would be super cool if I got to go with you and we all got to go together. That would be ideal. So they're giving away 5 slots. It's not just one spot, but it's a pretty good chance in the draw because, it's not, like the lottery or anything like that. You're up against whoever actually physically attends events or attends events online, not people who register and attend. So thanks everyone. Really appreciate it. Let's get stuck into it. So the first question really is, how do you get there? How do you get to Antarctica? Well, that's not the text at the bottom of my screen. It's not showing up, but that's okay. No, that's all right. It doesn't work. That's okay. So first of all, you have to fly from wherever your starting destination is. Usually you would fly to Santiago. So Santiago in Chile. And then from there, you fly across to Buenos Aires to get you into Argentina. And then you're taking a domestic flight from Buenos Aires down to the very bottom of the world to a little town right on the peninsula called Ushuaia. So it's actually one of the most picturesque flights that you can do. Not the first half. The first half to Santiago is pretty boring, but you get to fly across when you land in Chile, then you get to fly across the Andes. So these 2 photos here are just from my phone as I was flying across the Andes, and it's really incredible as you take off out of Santiago. A really quite steep ascent, but you fly no more than 1 kilometer over the Andes mountain range, and it makes me. I was on my way to Antarctica, and I was like, oh, I'd love to go and shoot down there. So that's a really, really spectacular section of the trip. So I was really, really, really excited by that. Just being in South America, I'd never been before. I haven't actually traveled a lot. I've been to Europe and Fiji and the US once. So for someone who hasn't traveled a lot, this was a really big journey. Especially considering a lot of people will do, Africa, or they'll do safaris, and then Antarctica might be at the very end of their list. It's something that they go, oh, I'd love to do that. That's a long-term goal. I'm very fortunate and also very thankful that I got to go so young. In the middle there, you can see Jared and Alicia. They're 2 Sony ambassadors as well. I ran into them in Buenos Aires, and it was lovely to catch up as we're all, globe-trotting. So this is the ship that I was living on. It's the MV Ocean Endeavour. It's chartered by Intrepid Travel. And yeah, someone in the chat has already mentioned the infamous Drake Passage. So I'll address that first because that's one of the most exciting parts of the trip. One thing that Intrepid make very clear in these kind of expeditions is it is an expedition, not a cruise. So there's no set itinerary. They're managing the weather, whether it's safe for people to go out in zodiacs and things like that. They're managing a lot of logistics in terms of the actual expedition. There's no set itinerary. It's very weather dependent. And the Drake Passage is obviously one part of that. So they always say to Drake-proof yourself and Drake-proof your room. So that's kind of like, putting things down, not sitting cameras on tables, important things like that. And then obviously taking seasickness pills to help you with the journey. So there's 2 situations here. You can have the Drake Lake or you can have the Drake Shake. And on my first expedition across the Drake, so I went down and then back, down and then back. So I did 2 voyages. On the first trip, I was incredibly seasick. We had 4 meter to 5 meter swell. And later I was informed that was in fact the Drake Lake. Because on the second trip, we had the Drake Shake, and that was 8 meter waves with a 13 meter swell in some occasions, which was pretty insane. If you're very good with spatial things, 8 meters is a lot bigger than you think it is. Even like like a phone pole is probably only 6 meters tall. So when you really think about what 8 meters looks like, 8 meters is phenomenal. It's huge. So yeah, definitely Drake proof yourself before you go on a trip like that. Can't recommend seasickness pills enough, actually. Because I was very sick, and I spent the first 2 days at sea in bed, and I woke up and I was already there. So I actually got to miss out on a little bit. Got to miss out on a lot of it. So I've just had like a million people message me about this live stream. The trip itself is 2 days across the Drake Passage, so it's a lot. And unfortunately, like I said, I missed out on a lot of what goes on that trip. So I did all the safety briefings and things like that, but it's a really, really good opportunity to spot wildlife, which is surprising. You think a lot of it's going to be down actually on the Antarctic Peninsula, but you can spot albatross and whales, sometimes dolphins. There's a lot of things to see while you're there. One of the coolest parts about that Drake Passage crossing is the albatross will fly in the wake of the ship. So not the water wake from the propeller, they'll fly in the air wake from that the ship creates as it crosses the Drake. And it means that they can travel for 80, 90 kilometers without flapping their wings. So you can watch this one albatross just enjoying its time, fishing and just gliding through the slipstream. All right, so just a quick thing. If you don't know what a Zodiac is, a Zodiac are these little inflatable pontoon boats. So they're made up of 6 separate inflatable sections, and that means you can pop something or hit a rock and you're not going to sink. But so just in case you didn't know what a Zodiac is, I've put this in right at the very beginning. All of the ones on the MV Ocean Endeavour, they all had constellation names, hence like Zodiac. And we had a trivia night, and one of the questions was name all the zodiacs that you can. So that was a really fun challenge because no one could. I think one of the other teams won, and they just guessed because they wrote down as many zodiac constellations as they could. All right, what did I take with me? I'm guessing. I'm guessing everyone here is a photographer or filmmaker, but you never know. So in terms of what I actually took with me, I took with me a Alpha 1, an Alpha 7 R5, a 24-70, and a 70-200. I did take down a big bag that was living on the ship already, like a big bag of Sony gear that we were dishing out to the guests on board. And in that bag, there was also a 200-600, which I stole on the odd occasion. But that gear was really meant for the guests on the ship that were part of the photography program. The 70-200 probably wasn't as much reach as I wanted. Ideally, I would have taken something a little bit longer, but because I was using 2 quite high resolution cameras, I was more than happy to turn that 70-200 into a 100-300 odd or 100-350 equivalent, which was really nice, and you're still getting tons of resolution to work with. All right, any questions about the gear that I took? Or we could save it to the end. So Josie's just asked, you could slap a 2 times telly on top and really bump it out. I didn't think of that. We did have telly converters down there. I did find that I got away with the 70-200 90% of the time. And then on the odd occasion, maybe when I was focusing on wildlife a little bit, maybe something longer like a 600 or a 200-600 would have been better. ND filters, yeah, I took an ND filter mainly for video though, not necessarily for photo, because I didn't really want to cut the light. It's quite overcast down there. There's tons of light to work with, but I didn't really have a need to kill the light for any photography, especially because we weren't allowed tripods due to avian flu, which I'll touch on later. All right. What were my key learnings? What did I really learned photographically speaking. Like obviously learned a lot about travel and working on a ship, and there's so much more. This is really just what I learned in terms of a photographic or like filmmaker standpoint. I really learned to underexpose a lot more than you're typically used to, just because you're navigating an environment where there's an excess of light. I was still exposing a little bit under, like a third of a stop under, but realistically, when I brought all these files into editing, I was dramatically decreasing the exposure, really pulling it down to bring out the detail in the ice. And I was more than happy to crush a bit of the detail in the rocks because it adds contrast back into the image. Whereas if everything's really cleanly, flatly exposed, it takes out a little bit of the drama. I also cooled down a lot of my images. Cameras tend to white balance quite warm when they're dealing with snow. And I was cooling down my images a lot in post, just because, you're in Antarctica, you want it to feel cold. And if your images look and feel too warm, it kind of detracts for a little bit from the kind of, the atmosphere, so to speak. Again, there was like a huge excess of light. I thought I would be up at quite high ISOs, considering that I wanted to freeze a lot of the movement of the penguins or the seals and so on. But I was often sitting at ISO 200, ISO 400 most of the day, which is relatively low considering we're shooting wildlife. A lot of wildlife photographers are used to shooting at ISO 10,000 and above, just so they can freeze motion, especially with bird photography. The other thing I learned is zooms over primes. I'm definitely a prime shooter, but I did swap and decide to take 2 zooms, and that's just because of the flexibility that I knew I would get out of zooms. There's certain restrictions on how close the Zodiacs can approach to certain sized icebergs. There's challenges with how many people you have in the Zodiac trying to get the shot over, say, someone's shoulder, etc. So having a zoom was a lot more useful in my case. I did take that 24-70, and I think I used it for 100 photos out of the whole trip. Nearly everything else was on that 200-600 or the 70-200. You can also, when you get back from a trip like this, or if you're planning a future trip, you can go into your Lightroom catalog and you can look at your catalog of images and see what percentages of how often you use each lens, or specific focal lengths within that lens. So you could say you choose a 24-70 and you find that 90% of the time you're shooting at 50, go buy a 50 mil. And that's another really helpful way to kind of help you understand your shooting style, and then also inform you for future purchases if that's what you're into. That 24-70 is pretty good. That's kind of all you need, unless you're shooting wildlife. The next one is posture and positioning. So in the Zodiacs, I might jump back. You can see the Zodiac here. Typically, you're orientated along each side of the Zodiac with your feet sitting in the middle. You have the option to turn around and shoot, but one thing I picked up on very quickly is if you do rest your arms on the side of the Zodiac, the vibration from the boat alone or from the motor itself can introduce a little bit of shake. So you can see someone leaning over the edge here. I think for wide angle shots, you won't notice it. But on that kind of extreme telephoto end, or if you're shooting video, you'll notice it straight away. There's like a distinct jitter that's introduced by the vibrations from the Zodiac. Josie's asked another question because she's an absolute legend. For this kind of work, if you were limited to primes and had no zoom lenses available, what length would I go for? If money was no object, I'd go for a 300 GM f2.8, and that would be ideal. And I'd be happy to crop that to get me a bit extra reach. I think the 300 would be ideal for this kind of thing because you do often deal with close-up wildlife, leopard seals, Weddell seals, and skuas. I'll go through all this later, but there is quite a lot of wildlife that you get reasonably close to. A lot of them have no land predators. So as soon as they're on land, they kind of don't care. And they're quite comfortable with you within like a relatively close proximity. Obviously, there's a 5-meter wildlife rule that you have to obey, especially with some of those larger seals. But for me, it'd probably be the 300 GM if we're talking primes. Some of those big landscapes in the background, like, yeah, it'd be nice to have a 14 or something super wide, but then you're really gonna limit your experience. You'll effectively only be able to shoot for an hour a day, as opposed to being able to shoot all day. All right. My key compositions and frames, I'll just remove myself from it so everyone can see. Oh, that's a really good question. I'll finish this slide and then I'll answer that question there, because that's a fantastic one. The key compositions and frames, I really focus on action and wildlife first. If you're too busy off with the fairies, looking at the ice and the textures and things like that, you'll miss a lot of the action. So on my first expedition, I was very much shooting large ice formations and focusing then on wildlife and the action that was happening around me. Whereas on the second voyage, I learned that I should be shooting the action first. And when I have downtime, that's when you can start focusing on those like shapes and textures and patterns in the ice. You can come away with a really diverse kind of gallery where you can come away with images that reflect that really tell the story of the location, as opposed to, like a catalog of just each species that you saw. I think it's important to really document the experience. So on the first trip, I was very focused on the landscape, the wildlife, and everything else. And then on the second trip, that's when I started taking more photos of the ship, the crew, more of my experience. And I think that was a really healthy way to approach an expedition like this. All right. How do you prepare physically and mentally for an expedition to one of the harshest environments on Earth? I'm really lucky because I went in summer and it's actually not that cold. It probably only drops down to about 2 or 3 degrees air temperature, or probably a bit lower, maybe just below sub-zero. And the water is obviously just above freezing as well. You're on the ship. The ship's heated. You have a nice little cabin. And, you're packing warm clothes. You're wearing ski pants and gloves when you go outdoors. I'm going to get all into this soon. But it is incredibly harsh, but the Intrepid team are there to make the expedition possible as a first goal, but then also comfortable as well. So, the Zodiac cruises only last for an hour or so. The food on board is great. There's plenty of entertainment. There's a bar, like a piano. There's a sauna, a gym. There's so much on the ship to kind of make the experience something special. But it is an expedition, so it is into a very harsh environment, but the team are obviously trained, prepared, and the ship's designed for an expedition like this. I mentioned an abundance of light and underexposing. Did you experiment with AEB to better handle the details? Not really. I basically, you can either set to ISO auto and then just use an exposure compensation dial and just drop a stop or two, or you just shoot normally and then drag it down later. It depends on your subject. Like the shot that you're looking at on screen right now, I pulled that down a whole stop and a half, and the dynamic range is there. You can see that information in the shot. I didn't lose anything in the shadows, and I've got so much detail in the sky. I think because the landscape is so flat, is in the dynamic range is so low. You're not dealing with a harsh sunlight and deep dark shadows. You're dealing with a much smaller dynamic range. So it's easier to keep everything within the limitations of the camera. All right. If you're going on one of these expeditions, these are the must-haves, or any expedition to a cold area. Sorry, I'm just watching the YouTube over on the other screen so I can check that we're all good. Must-haves are dry bags. So when you're going out to the Zodiac, you'll walk down a little gangway. I've got photos later. You walk down a little gangway off the side of the ship and then you climb into the Zodiac. When you're doing that, I have all of my camera gear rolled up in a dry bag inside another waterproof backpack. And then once you're out in the Zodiac, you can unroll the dry bag and pull your camera out and shoot as needed. The Intrepid staff, like the expedition team, they will only take you out if the wind is below 15 knots, because that's the safety limitation of how they can unload the Zodiacs from the ship. And anything above 15 knots is probably going to make the water a bit choppy anyway. But because you're protected from the peninsula itself, there's this whole set of islands. You'll see a lot of photos of them in this presentation. Those islands block a lot of those harsher seas from breaking inside the peninsula. So the water can be crystal clear and completely flat. It's something really special. So I was never really scared of like waves or my gear getting damaged or wet. I was more like when you're accelerating or moving quickly, you just put the camera away. And when you're ready to shoot again, you pull the camera out. Take lots of lens cloths because sometimes your camera can fog depending on if you've had the camera turned off and it's been in your hand and it's getting hot and you're transitioning from the inside of the ship where it's heated to the outdoor environment. Sometimes you can deal with some fogging issues. I also took silica packets. So some people have a dry cabinet at home. I can't be bothered paying for one, and I shoot almost every single day. So I'm never unpacking and repacking my bag because that just seems pointless. I leave all my lenses in my backpack, but I put in those little silica packets that you get from Amazon and things like that. And they work a treat. Keep all your gear nice and dry and prevents fungus and things like that. Seasickness tablets. This is a big one. I don't get seasick usually, and I thought, oh, I'll be fine. And I just took like a little packet of Travacalm with me. Did not work. I was violently ill. Don't do it. Pack seasickness tablets. And lastly, gloves. I used a brand called Valeray. I think they're a French company, but they have the forefinger and thumb and index, middle finger and thumb have like these removable sections, and they're quite a thin, lightweight glove, but quite warm, and that's so that you can still operate the camera in colder conditions without using those like massive ski gloves, which will obviously like kind of impair your ability to operate a camera. Yeah. So Josie's asked as well, thermal clothing for under snow gear as well. You'll see a photo of me later. You get obviously given a jacket, so all the guests are given a same jacket, so it's got like fluoro safety kind of like high-vis stuff on it. It's also to keep you warm, but I'm wearing usually a thermal. On the first day, I overdressed. I wore thermal long pants, then I wore cargo pants, like hiking pants, and then I wore my ski pants on top. And on the top, I had thermals, a t-shirt, a hoodie, then the exterior jacket. And while if you're walking, you get really, really, really hot. So by the end of the trip, which the weather's still only 2 or 3 degrees, by the end I was just wearing just the thermal pants and the ski pants, and then just a t-shirt and the jacket, and I was perfectly warm. It's a bit different if you fall in though. All right. So I'll go through some of the wildlife now. I mean, that's why everyone's here. Antarctica's cool, but it's the wildlife that really make it so special. So you can see here, there's I think it's 5 little leopard seals in the water. So they're really curious. They like to come up to the zodiacs. They're basically the apex predator down there, but they're really really curious. And we got to have some really great encounters with them coming like right up to the zodiacs and checking us out. They're also so much more agile than you think. You see them on land, and they kind of waddle around. Once they're in the water, they are incredible. They can dip and duck and dive. They're insanely quick. It's like a penguin as well. Most of the Antarctic animals are quite clumsy on land, and then they're little pocket rockets once they're in the water. So this is a leopard seal. They're given that name obviously because there's a distinct kind of like spotted pattern that they tend to have on their underside. They're generally like a longer, thinner, elongated shape. And yeah, they're the apex predator down there. You can see I've got a really nice photo here, nice and fast shutter speed, getting the little snowflakes as they're falling, and then this leopard seal's having a really big yawn. This is another shot of the leopard seal, different one. You can see that the distinct kind of red coloration on the tummy. Again, it really depends on what seal you're looking at. They can look so different to to kind of like the stereotypical image of a leopard seal. In fact, the British Antarctic Survey, which was the British kind of residence down in Antarctica up until I think the 80s or 90s, they printed a postcard which had a leopard seal on it, but it was mislabeled as a Weddell seal. So if you can identify a leopard seal, you're already doing better than the British Antarctic Survey. Ben's asked, how close do you normally come to these animals? I think most of these shots, so the previous one and the one here, I'm on that 70 to 200. So I'm relatively close. This shot here, I think I'm probably only maybe 10, 12 meters away from the leopard seal, and it's just hanging out on a little piece of ice. One thing I do, photographically speaking, like about this image is having a darker background. It really helps the animal pop from the foreground itself. In Antarctica, there's going to be a lot of white, but if you can position yourself where you're having those deep blue tones in the background, whether that be in the water or glacial ice in the background, you'll get those deeper blue hues, and it really helps separate your subject from the background. You can see here that's not as exciting of a photo. Maybe I'll put myself back on screen so you can see me. I've probably been using my hands, but now you can see me again. Yeah, again, I'm probably only 12, 15 meters away at any given point. So we're still in the zodiacs. I'm not on land with this leopard seal. We're in a zodiac. We're driving around. Typically on each day of the expedition, you would be doing one zodiac cruise and then one landing. So the zodiac cruise could be hour and a half. You go out and just cruise around between the icebergs looking for wildlife or looking for shots that you want to take. And then in the afternoon, typically we would go and do a landing. So that could be at any of the islands along the peninsula or actually on the Antarctic continent itself. So it's very easy to maneuver. The photography team that are on board, they actually orientate the zodiac to suit each shot. So you could get your shot if you're on the right-hand side of the zodiac, then the driver will reorientate the zodiac and give everyone that's in that zodiac an opportunity to take a photo, which is really good. It means that no one's missing any shots. How many hard drives backups and how many hard drives and backups did I bring on my trip? Okay, so I took my MacBook Pro, which I'm on right now. So I took that with me and then just one additional hard drive. But between each of those sessions, so I would go out in the morning, then I would come back and back up everything from that morning. So one copy on my laptop, one copy on the hard drive. So I use the little Samsung T9 SSDs. They're really smart. They're relatively cheap, really fast, and I haven't had any problems with them. And then I would, once I backed all of that up, including like photo and video, then I would be wiping the cards and then going back out for the next session. That way, if anything happens during my trip, I'm only losing that specific session. I'm not losing all of my photos previously. I only took 4 memory cards with me, but I was religiously backing up as I went along. I think I shot maybe like 600 gig of stuff, which isn't actually a lot when you think about it. Each of the sessions I would go out and probably take about 1,000 photos, and I think I would probably edit it down to about 40 or 50 per outing, so to speak. All right, it's already 8 o'clock. Let's blast. We got to blast through this now. Here's another beautiful photo of a leopard seal. I love this one because it made direct eye contact with my camera as I was taking it. It was kind of like a, ooh, what are you guys doing here? This has got a nice white pattern. You can see those still got the little leopard spots, but are very different color palette compared to, say, the previous leopard seal. Lawrence has asked, were there any close calls with wildlife whilst in the Zodiac? We had some whales swim underneath a few of the Zodiacs, as well as leopard seals swimming, under and through those underneath the Zodiacs and really taking a good peek at us. Most animal behavior down there is quite similar depending on the species, but they all do a thing called spy hopping, which is where you put your head under the water and then you pop up and then pop down. It's most closely associated with humpback whales, but I saw leopard seals doing it next to the zodiacs as well. Kind of like they can see the bottom of the zodiac, but they don't know what's in the zodiac, so they'll pop right out of the water and take like a really good peek at you, and then just slide back in. All right, you can see that there. That's a Weddell seal, so that's obviously named after where the Weddell Sea, and also the some of those early expeditions that obviously hence the namesake. These guys always look like they've just had the biggest meal of their life and they're having a huge siesta. That's what I think about the Weddell seal. They're incredibly cute, not super aggressive, but they are huge. I'm talking like double my height. So they're massive, but they're big softies. And I think I kind of fell in love with the Weddell seal. I only saw 2 or 3 of them when I was there, but I saw like 30 leopard seals, but the 2 or 3 Weddell seals that I saw, I definitely kind of fell in love with them. They'll be laying on their side and they'll look up to see you and they'll go, oh, and then I'll go back to sleep. And then if you walk over a bit closer, they'll put their head up and go, oh, what are you doing? Oh, nothing. And then they'll go back to sleep. Yeah, they've got a big soft spot. Got a big soft spot for these guys. This is an Antarctic fur seal. They were almost hunted to extinction in the 18th and 19th century, and now they're making a pretty decent bounce back, which is really exciting. This was taken at a very almost a little bit further north of the peninsula on our return trip on the last kind of few days, and it was really cool to see them in such big numbers. And they're also very curious. They're also huge posers. The moment you put a camera on them, they'll look at you and then they'll turn sideways and then they'll turn the other way. They're real posers. They want you to get their best angle. They absolutely love the camera. Yeah, you can see this Antarctic fur seal here. This one's up on a little bit of floating ice called a Bergy bit. So all the different sizes of iceberg, not everything is an iceberg. Some of it's called sea ice, some of it's called Bergy bits. Then you've got icebergs, and then obviously like there's a bit of a scale. So not everything is an iceberg. This one's up on a little bit of an iceberg here. And yeah, as soon as I pointed my camera at this fella, he gave me his best angle and I snapped this shot. This is my view. So I tended to sneak up to the front of the Zodiac on most of the Zodiac cruises. This is kind of a stereotypical view of the Antarctic Peninsula. You have these huge mountain ranges that just rise up directly out of the sea, where you can see the glacial ice kind of descending down the side of this mountain range on the left. A lot of bergy bits and a few icebergs in the foreground, and then these kind of larger, less steep rocky patches. And these less steep rocky patches are where you see majority of the penguin colonies. But I've saved all the pelicans, not the pelicans, I've saved all the penguins to the end. Sorry, my partner studies pelicans, and because I say the two so often, I always end up saying the wrong one. You see a lot of these penguin colonies. I've saved all the penguins to the end to stop you all from disappearing. So if you want to see penguins, stay to the end. I'll talk a little bit about the citizen science that was going on board. So when we were crossing the Drake Passage, they were conducting a thing called the Ocean Bird Survey. So that's obviously cataloging and IDing a few of the bird species that they see while they cross the Antarctic, while we cross the Drake Passage. We still did a fair bit of that when we were actually on the peninsula, but that's more of a Drake Passage thing. I was lucky enough to be on a trip where the World Wildlife Fund were actually conducting aerial surveys using drones. So they use like a regular Mavic Air or something. They use like a consumer grade drone, and they'll be flying the drone at a safe distance. So I think that's approximately 30 meters. They have special permits and a whole ton of other stuff, but they'll be operating the drones out of the Zodiacs and then conducting basically a width and breadth check on each of the whales. And to no surprise, whales are getting smaller because of krill fishing in the Antarctic region. So humpbacks predominantly eat krill, and there's a lot of the krill colonies, or like krill, I guess you'd call catcheries, they're on the Antarctic Peninsula. And due to overfishing, there's obviously less and less krill. So the whales are getting smaller, which means they have to stay in Antarctica for longer to feed up enough, to put on enough weight and to grow and large enough to make the journey back north for their migration. But because they have to eat more, it delays the migration, and the flow-on effect is that you can miss certain migration patterns. It disrupts the migration pattern, and then obviously the flow-on effect is that it will affect breeding. So the University of Santa Cruz and the University of California were there also doing biopsies. So to conduct a biopsy, they use a crossbow, and it has a small, 1/2 inch or 1.5 inch head on the arrow with a rubber stopper. So the arrowhead will penetrate the whale's blubber and then hit the rubber stopper so it doesn't continue to penetrate the whale, and then they can wind that tissue sample back and use it to both do a DNA, ID, and a few other health checks for the whale. So it was really cool to see them doing that there and seeing science in like up close and personal. Like my partner and I are really big into conservation and conservation photography, but it was really exciting to see them working. We weren't really allowed to photograph it as much. You need special permits to do photography for that kind of thing, but it was really cool to see up close. What was I going to say? With the whale surveys as well, krill are basically all krill are either caught for oil, so krill oil, or they're used in pet food, which is something I didn't know. And that's one of the things I learned from some of the seminars that they host on board. A lot of the crew and team are, either scientists or conservationists in one way or another. And there's so much you can learn from just a quick chat with any of the crew members or by attending the talks they have on board. So you get to do your expeditions, you get to go out in the Zodiacs, but a lot of the experience for me, at least, was learning from, glaciologists, biologists, marine biologists. So many of these people on board are incredibly talented and definitely overqualified. The University of Santa Cruz was also there to investigate bird flu. So Intrepid as a company, something I really love about them is that they dedicate a certain number of spots on board these ships. So the ship has a staff of about 100, an expedition crew of about 30, and a guest list of about 200. And Intrepid gives a small portion of that guest list and keeps it open for science and research, which I think is really, really special, because getting down to Antarctica on a purely research merit is virtually impossible. So piggybacking off a tourism operator is really the only way to go. So they had 2 researchers from the University of Santa Cruz, and they were investigating avian flu. And the big issue there is that avian flu in the Northern Hemisphere predominantly affects birds, but avian flu, if it makes it down to Antarctica, which it now has, it has the potential to also make its way through seal populations as well. So seals are quite susceptible to it. So there was a big risk of, one, we wouldn't be able to visit certain sites, really strict cleaning and preparation schedules in terms of what we can and can't take onto the continent. And then obviously the real risk is that it would obviously make its way through seal populations as well as bird populations down there. So that's kind of a little bit about the science of what I saw while I was down there, and a little bit about the work that goes on board. One of the crew members, Emily, she was in charge of the citizen science program, and they run a few extra like additional courses and things like that are, you can participate in. Here's another image. This one is from up in a little penguin colony. So these are Gentoo penguins. I really should have put the spelling up on the thing, but that's okay. You can see a lot of these icebergs and bergy bits in the background, and I chose to put them in the background specifically because it shows a bit of a sense of scale. Antarctica, everything's white, so it's really hard for you to understand or kind of demonstrate through photography the scale of things that are around you. So putting those penguins or putting people in your images really assist in kind of understanding how big this place really is. I really like photographing penguins in this way by showing a bit of a wider shot rather than just those like cute little penguin portraits. This was up at a colony, I think this is Danco Island, which is, if you want to Google that, that's okay. It's DANCO, Danco Island. One of the little crests that, well, it's an island, but it has quite a high rocky plateau that you can visit, and it gives you a real good vantage point for a lot of the surrounding areas. I got to put myself back on screen. I keep forgetting. All right, so here's another image. You can see I've really turned down the coolness of the image to really make these ice colors a very blue, very steely blue tint. No one critique me. You can see sensor dust up on the top left. These kind of iceberg shapes with the light hitting it at the right angle, I was shooting backlit a lot. So backlit is putting the sun off to the side, just out of frame, but it gives this kind of sheen to the ice as it melts. Obviously, when the sunlight's hitting the ice, it's melting it, and you get this lovely, beautiful sheen across the ice, and that's something that I really wanted to photograph. And we have a skua, so it's spelled S-K-U-A. These birds are penguin killers. They're, wrong one. That was a bit of a jump scare. It is quite heartbreaking. Obviously, you're there as a bystander. You're not allowed to intervene. You can't get too close. You have to simply watch. I saw a few of these birds. They will team up and they'll hunt down baby chicks. So at the end of the season, which is when I was there, February through March, the penguins will be returning to sea soon. So a lot of the colonies have larger chicks and they're ready to shed their chick coat and then head into the water. But there were a lot of chicks that were born simply too late in the season. And so they'll either be left behind or they'll be killed by skuas because they can't get into the water. They'll freeze. They haven't developed their oily protective layer yet. So it's really hard to watch, but we saw a lot of these skuas hunting down baby penguins, and it was pretty difficult. I didn't photograph any of it. It was a bit hard. Any guesses what this is? Someone put it in the comments. Yes, this thing's interactive. Gotta wait for the delay. No one's commenting. Anyone have any idea what this is? Driftwood from Twilight, obviously. Your comments are killing me. Petrified wood, that's a good guess. That's a really good guess. Anyone else? No, I'm just sitting here in silence. It is a whale bone. So Antarctica was one of the major areas during the whaling era, as in like one of the most prominent, but also the largest, in the sense that when the whales are down in Antarctica, they're sleeping a lot, they're eating a lot, they're not as agile or mobile due to the cold. And it's part of the season where they're just not as active. And because of that, they're really, really, really easy to hunt, especially while they're sleeping. So whales, unlike us, we can sleep because we can just turn everything off and we can still breathe. Whales lack the section of their brain that controls breathing, in the sense that it's an automated function. Whales have to consciously remember to breathe. So when they dive, they have to go, oh, I need to breathe, and then they go down. So because they can't do that subconsciously or unconsciously, they have to they obviously have to remember to breathe, which means they cannot sleep. So what whales will do is they'll sit on the surface, and because their brain has two hemispheres, just like us, they'll turn off one hemisphere and just sit there. And the other hemisphere is solely responsible for maintaining the breathing function, and the other hemisphere is resting. And then they alternate between each hemisphere over the course of like multiple sleeps. And when they're in this state, they're just floating on the surface. And I can imagine that during the whaling era, that would have been the easiest target you could possibly imagine, as horrible as that is. So there's a lot of evidence of whaling down there, whether that be whale bones on the shore, as well as actual physical evidence of human whaling stations. But I'll get onto that soon. You can see that here, there's a couple of little ships, the remnants of some rowboats over on the side. I think this is Peterman. This might be Peterman Island. I can't remember from memory. But all those textures you can see in the midground, in the center of this image, that is all whale rib and vertebrae from whale carcasses. It is incredible to see the sheer size of some of the vertebrae. You know, some of the parts of the whale spine are easily the size of a small chair or a table. It is quite a moving experience when you're surrounded by the evidence of so much death. Yeah, it is. It's a very quiet day that day. But this is a more exciting thing. This is if you're doing a whale watching cruise in Sydney, or if you have done one or haven't done one yet. Next time you're out, take a photo of the underside of a whale's tail. The underside of a whale's tail is very similar to our fingerprint in the sense that it's not easily replicated, and you can use it to ID a whale. So it looks at texture, color, pattern, and you can see these little tiny bumpy ridges on the side, or sorry, on the top of the underside of the tail. And using this information, there is a website / app called Happy Whale. And if you take a reasonably high resolution photo of a whale's tail on the underside, you can use it to ID. So this shot here that I got of a humpback flapping its tail, what we call a fluke. I took a photo of this fluke. This whale has been down in Antarctica for about 4 months. But before that, it was living its high life in Costa Rica, enjoying some sun, hopefully breeding, and then it made its way down to the Antarctic Peninsula to feed up for the next season. Yep, so if you're out whale watching, try and snag a photo of a fluke. Another interesting science fact. I feel like I came away with more science than I came away with photos, but that's kind of good. The breaching behavior that we see in Sydney, so that's the whale breaching the water and landing back and then going back in, that breaching behavior is exclusively a warm weather activity. You will not see whales really breaching down there. It's more of this kind of like undulating, they'll surface dive, and occasionally you'll get a nice fluke. Here's another image here where you can see a bit of the scale of Antarctica. You can see a little zodiac in the distance with some passengers in it, looking at an ice cave. It looks like they're relatively close to that iceberg in this image, but that's just the compression by using a telephoto lens. In reality, they're probably about 40, 50 meters away from this iceberg, and that's due to the tipping. So icebergs will tip because of a change in density or due to a melting that affects the weight distribution of the iceberg. The water temperature is always warmer than the air temperature in Antarctica, and so the underside of the iceberg will melt, causing a weight imbalance that will cause the iceberg to tip. We have to stay pretty far away from these icebergs because you don't know how much ice is under there. Everyone knows the fact that the iceberg's always bigger on the bottom than the top, yada, yada, yada. But it means that if you approach too closely and you can see movement or rocking in the iceberg, there's a potential for the iceberg to rock and then tip, and you obviously don't want to be close to it when that happens. I saw a couple of photos and videos of icebergs that look like the size of a car, and then when they tip, these huge pillars of ice shoot out of the water, hundreds of meters away. So it's something that obviously is factored in terms of safety, but there's obviously certain exclusion zones and like protocol for approaching certain icebergs at certain times of the year, etc. While we're chatting icebergs, I can't remember the exact name of the iceberg. I think it's A25, A24B or something. There's an iceberg that's approximately 40 kilometers long, and it broke off in the 1980s, and it's been floating around Antarctica ever since. So ice that breaks off and makes its way out to sea, there's a big current that runs around Antarctica called the circumpolar current, and it gets swept up in that. So this iceberg's just out there, 40 kilometers long, 40 kilometers wide, and it's just floating around. It's just doing circles, and unfortunately we didn't see it, but it is out there. This is my favorite shot of the trip. This actually got me a finalist in the Alpha Awards Partners and Affiliates section. So that's the section for people that can't submit because we work with Sony. But I was really happy with it. This is taken middle of the day. In fact, I actually had an ND filter on at the time. The Zodiac is doing about, it's doing about 20 knots right now. So the Zodiac is flying along, and I was shooting video, and I didn't have time to unscrew my ND filter, so I just took it back to the minimum I could take it, so it wasn't killing as much light. I snapped the photo. I should have shot it at f8. I should have shot it at this. I should have shot it at that. But it was one of those moments where you see a composition that you need, and I didn't have time to take the ND filter off. So this is shot with an ND filter, auto white balance, f2.8, which is silly for landscape, at like 1/2000th of a second, so I could freeze the motion. But I was really happy with the image regardless, and it's still one of my all-time favorites. So it goes to show that good storytelling and exciting light and exciting elements in the photo are more important than in technical skill. It was shot at f2.8 on the 24-70. I didn't take anything faster than a 2.8. Didn't really need it. So I was using a lot of the telephoto lenses to really isolate the background. Oh, thanks, Lawrence. Using these longer telephoto lenses to really isolate subjects. So picking out something I wanted in the distance and really kind of isolating it. This was just a little iceberg drifting past off one of the islands that we were on that day. And here's another reason why I took that 70-200. I'll post it in the thing so you actually know the exact name of it. But it's the 70-200 G2, not an f2.8, and it's not the G Master. It's the G series, but the version 2, and I took it because it is a macro lens. So this image here is shot, me leaning over the side of a Zodiac. I'm moving, the ice is moving. It's shot at f4 with the 70-200 at 200 millimeters in the macro mode. So I find it just absolutely incredible that you can capture an image like this in such a rapidly changing environment. You might be wondering why the ice is so clear, yet in all of my photos everything looks white. So it's all to do with ice density. So when ice is first formed, it is white because there's a lot of air. When ice freezes rapidly on the surface of the water, we call sea ice or brash ice, it's freezing very quickly, so there's a lot of oxygen in it. And then over time, as it's compressed or compacted under lots of other layers of ice or frozen, melted, that process will slowly remove a lot of that oxygen, and you'll end up with this really translucent, very clear ice. So this is what maybe would be more associated with glacial ice. So I can look at this ice straight away and say that I know it's very old ice because it's so clear. So fresh ice is white, old ice is clear. So if you learn anything from today, you know how to identify the age of ice. Did I grab video of some ice like this? I did, and you might see it in the video at the end. One of the highlights for me was the polar plunge. So the polar plunge is where you all jump in the water, they tie a rope around your waist and push you off. I was one of the first people to go in on the trip, so I was a bit nervous. But you jump in, and then you climb out, and you do a shot of vodka. nice and warm, and then you go have a nice hot shower, and the euphoric feeling that you get from the hot to cold transition is really, really, really fun. But I was a bit scared because the water is quite cold. They have you to a rope, and it's perfectly safe. In my head, I was like, I can stay in here for ages. It's not that cold. I feel fine. But your body is already swimming back to the ladder saying, like, get me out of here, get me out of here. Especially because doing ice baths in Sydney, I know some people that do ice baths, the water might be sub-zero, but we're talking the air temperature is, 20 degrees, 25 degrees. When you're in the water and the water's, 2 degrees Celsius and the air temperature is like 0 or below, you really notice it. You feel a lot colder. It really saps it out of you. So this guy here, his name is Fernando. He's an Argentinian professor of law at the University of Buenos Aires. He was a really funny guy. He's a ex-commander of the Argentine Navy. And every time something good would happen, or anytime he would do anything exciting, he would go, "Come on!" And that was his catchphrase. So 90% of the phone clips from the trip that I have there's him in the background going, "Come on!" Like that, exactly verbatim accent and everything. So I've got another slide of him jumping in. There's him again. "Come on!" Same thing. He really brought the energy on this trip. Just checking that no one else has messaged me saying, "Oh, I'm running late." Lawrence, I'm striving to be as cool as Fernando. Fernando has a book, and I bought a signed copy from him, and it's called The Penguin Protector. And I don't think I'll ever be as cool as Fernando. Yeah, really, really, really fun, exciting guy. He also sings, which is pretty cool. Here's another close-up shot of the ship. So the MV Ocean Endeavour. You can see the lifeboats. You can kind of see at the rear of the ship. That's where the Zodiacs are loaded and then obviously offloaded. Can't really see it in the shot here, but along the side of the ship where that Intrepid logo is, that's where the two little doors, the gangways that descend. You can see it in this shot here. These are the gangways that descend, so you can go down into the Zodiacs. But also, I mentioned earlier, like it is really safe. You can see how calm the water is. It's perfectly clear. You also might be thinking, well, the background there doesn't look very Antarctic. There's no snow. There's no ice. These images are from a place called Deception Island. And it's called Deception Island because it's basically shaped like a donut. And there's one tiny little hole through the side into the center. So it's really hard to find, and they didn't find it for quite a while. But Deception Island is an active volcano. So it was a whaling station for most of its life, but it does have an active volcano in the center of the island. And it's incredible because you can put your hand in the sand and it's about 50 degrees Celsius. So you can really feel the warmth. The whole island smells like sulfur. It's obviously monitored. It's monitored for safety and things like that. That little figure you can see in the distance, that's one of the expedition team setting out the route where we're allowed to walk. And that's through a little section called Neptune's Window. That's just like the view back towards Argentina. You can see there's a little bit of life now. We're seeing a little bit of green, a color you probably wouldn't expect to see in Antarctica. And that's obviously due to the minerals and then also the heat making it possible for life to survive. This photo here is one of my favorites from the trip. Shot on a 1635 that I remember I didn't take a 1635, but I borrowed a 1635 from someone else. And this is going through a section called Neptune's Bellows. And it's called Neptune's Bellows because this is where that really harsh Drake Passage meets the island and the entrance to the island. So it can be incredibly rough. And there's this narrow passageway you need to pass through. And it is absolutely huge. I can't even describe how big this place is. You can see I included a little zodiac down on the right-hand side, and I did that specifically to show off that sense of scale. Here's another image of that pillar, the pillar from the previous image. That's it from another angle. And you can see the Zodiac over there. Like this place is just, it feels very Jurassic Park. Like it feels like Jurassic. And here's another. I've just included a few photos here so you can get a bit of a understanding of the experience. Oh, we're getting close to the end. Actually, I might fly through this. So I got a nice silhouette shot. Again, super underexposing all of my images to really bring out that detail. And it is kind of nice, the idea of like isolating your subject and then silhouetting them against the ice and the snow. There's a photo of me. This is what I'm wearing. They give you boots on board. Got my ski pants. Got my little Intrepid branded little life vest. I felt like I was in SEAL Team 6 because I got the cool, like, it felt like I was wearing like a little armored plated vest or something. Got my strap around my camera, and there's me posing with my big explorer mustache. Another iceberg shot, really playing with that light as it hits the background of the iceberg. You could shoot icebergs all day. They're so beautiful to look at. The shapes, the textures. Every iceberg's different. These are the Seven Sisters. They're 7 peaks along along the peninsula. Got a beautiful sunset on them one day, which was really nice. A lot of the trip was quite cloudy. We had a couple of days of sun, which was nice. Some more ice textures getting up nice and close. Really, underexposing is what brings out that blue. When you shoot it, normally it's very white, and those shadowy sections are quite gray, but by dragging down the exposure or shooting slightly underexposed, you can really bring out those textures and those blues. There's a photo of some penguins on an iceberg. I got tons of photos of penguins. Didn't get many penguins on icebergs, so this was a bucket list shot for me, hopefully. This was shot off the side of the ship, not even in a Zodiac. But yeah, it was quite dark. I think this is shot at like ISO 8000 or something stupid. Aha, we finally arrived, the penguin portraits. So these are some little gentoos. There's a couple of different species of penguins down there. Emperor penguins are all further inland and further south, and then also up near the Georgian islands, South Georgian islands. Where I was mainly gentoo, chinstrap, and Adelie. I only saw one Adelie and maybe like a handful of chinstrap. Really, this area on the peninsula is very like gentoo orientated. You have to go much further south to get more Adelie and chinstraps. These little penguins here are the funniest things I've ever seen. When we put these little orange pegs everywhere to let the guests know where they can and can't walk, and these gentoos hate them. They'll go up to them and like rip them out of the ground, and they'll all cluster around and then like flap their little wings and cheer because one of their friends knocked over one of the orange poles. It's incredibly cute. I've got so many phone videos of them doing it. I didn't actually get them knocking it over though. I just got them all like clustering around it. But they're incredibly cute. They have no natural land predators. Maybe an Antarctic fur seal. But sorry, I'm just reading the comments as they come through. Any advantage to fly directly to Antarctica and cruise? The flights that go directly to Antarctica, they generally research only, and most of the tourism cruises will leave from Argentina, because the peninsula is the most hospitable and accessible part of the peninsula. A lot of the other flights either do a flight down and they don't even land; they just circle and come back, or I haven't heard of flying there directly and then cruising. There might be 1 or 2 operators that do it, but most operators you'll fly to Argentina. Back on the penguins, we have a 5-meter rule, so you can't approach within 5 meters, and if the penguin approaches you, you have to walk away. But because they have no natural land predators, they're very curious. Especially when we went to Peterman, they were a bunch of chicks who had probably never seen people before, and so they were like super duper curious. Another one of my favorite photos, this one's called Conga. They're all on their way somewhere, probably to go out for a bit of a swim, bit of a feed. This is them like kind of getting in and out of the water. Yeah, they all tend to like hang about in these like little clusters. It does give happy feet. unfortunately, none of them sung to us. They also smell like a fish market. It smells horrible. So like your first penguin experience is like, oh my god, penguins, and then it's like, oh my god, penguins. And then this is a photo that I really wanted. It's called it's a behavior called porpoising. That's when the penguins will basically porpoise in and out of the water. Incredibly hard to photograph because they're popping out of the water, and by the time your camera can focus, they're back under the water. So even using an A1, it's still difficult to photograph. You effectively have to focus where you think they're going to appear and then hopefully get the shot. This was shot on that 70 to 200, but I wish I had like the 200 to 600 that day, and I could have got that singular penguin in the middle. I would love to get that isolated on its own. One of the Sony ambassadors, Craig Parry, has that image on a 600mm lens, and it's just this one penguin, isolated, airborne, completely out of the water, and we all agree it's one of the best Antarctic photos we've ever seen. All right, so that's enough about me and my experience, but really it wouldn't be possible without the team at Intrepid, and also obviously Sony for putting me there. Intrepid is I really loved my time with Intrepid. It's a lot of the experience of Antarctica was amazing, but it was ultimately for me it was the people. You got to know so many scientists, crew, staff. So many of them are, again, as I said before, they're so overqualified. I mean, the guy on the right there, his name is Rune, and he's the Norwegian Royals family's photographer, which is just bananas to say out loud. It is really the people on board that you meet that really make the experience. It's really special. I've included the photo on the top left there as just so I could quickly talk about it. They do run a auction on board where they auction off some paraphernalia from the trip, and it all goes towards the WWF. So they auctioned off a bottle of whiskey that's called Shackleton whiskey, and the story behind that is they found Shackleton's hut in Antarctica, and underneath the floorboards they found some of the original bottles of whiskey from the Shackleton's expedition. And so they took it back to Scotland, had the original distiller remake that whiskey, and now it's available at your local Dan Murphy's. Another thing they auctioned off was a propeller from one of the Zodiacs that had hit a rock and destroyed its own propeller. So they auctioned that off. This map, one of the girls on board, Ellie, she drew these images here. So, there's a Weddell seal, a couple of penguins, a skua, a humpback whale. That's the nautical chart, the actual physical chart that shows where we went on each trip. So obviously everything's done with GPS these days, but they still keep an original nautical chart for safety in case any of the systems go down. But it is really cool. And so they auctioned that off. And I think one of them sold for something like $12,000, which is bananas. But it's good because all of that money is going to a worthwhile cause. I mean, that's like $12,000 is like the price of the whole trip, let alone. But I'm really glad that people that had some money, cash to splash, they're really putting it in the right place. All right, I'm not sure if this will play. I hope this plays. I'm not sure if that's going to play for you. If it will play on. Doesn't look like it. That's all right. It was just my Antarctica video from the trip. I made a little. It's available on this YouTube channel, but I was going to hopefully try to show it in this presentation, which would have been cool. Full screen layout. That's all right. I was going to show it, but that's okay. If you're really interested and want to see it, you can go and watch it on this YouTube channel. I posted it a little while ago, but it's got a lot of that video footage that I shot down there that we were talking about earlier. Lots of footage of the icebergs, penguins, everything. It's got a bit of everything in it. It's only a couple of minutes long. But yeah, if you're interested, go suss it out, because listening to me ramble for an hour and a half is a lot, and watching it in 5 minutes might just be easier. Okay, in that case, why don't we open the floor to more questions? Fire away. We've only got, a couple of minutes left. If If there's no questions that come in, then we all get an early mark and I can go have dinner. Otherwise, fire away. I'd love to answer all of your questions about Antarctica. I loved my experience. I can't recommend it enough. Hit me with everything you've got. Do you think it's possible to shoot film at 50 to 400 ISO, or would I struggle horrifically? Shooting film down there is possible. There was a guy who converted his whole bathroom in his cabin. So most people share a room with someone else. And but he had his own cabin because he was a crew member. He converted his bathroom to a dark room, and he was developing medium format film like on the ship while we were there. Super cool guy. So it is possible. I think some of those longer focal lengths without, modern cameras have sensor stabilization and optical image stabilization and things like that. I think it would be quite hard. You'd want a more modern film camera, one that can hit those faster shutter speeds, because that would obviously help with a lot of those issues. How do you get involved with taking photos for Sony or for scientific expeditions? Taking photos for Sony, I was lucky because I used to work there, and then left and kind of got like, "Oh, you want to keep working with us?" And I was like, "Yes, please." Taking photos for Sony is kind of like you got to know the right people. Unfortunately, that's kind of a lot of how the creative industry works. It's who you know, not what you know necessarily. That's just how the creative industry works. It's but Sony specifically, like, go to events, come to stuff like this, get to know the advocates, ambassadors, and just do the work. Take amazing photos, be social. That's really the Sony side of stuff. But scientific expeditions is a very different thing. Usually they're kind of like invite only, or you'd have to be involved in the research itself. Especially this is a tour. It's an expedition. But if you're going on a scientific expedition, they're probably looking at, they don't want to bring an extra body and an extra mouth to feed someone else that's just doing photos. They'd be hiring someone who can fill a multi-role capacity. They need someone who can, do first aid. They're looking for someone who is part of the research potentially. That's probably where I think it would, for expeditions at least, it's probably, you have to be multi-skilled or at least multidisciplinary. How fit do you have to be? Honestly, not super fit. The staircases down are pretty safe. There's someone there to hold your hand the whole time. If it gets choppy, the staff, they always help you in and out of the Zodiacs. You would probably just be, if you're comfortable walking on like a moderate to mid-grade walk, you'd be fine. Absolutely fine. You don't have to be like super fit. I struggle walking up hills, so and I was fine. You mentioned you can't take a tripod. What would you do for situations where you'd wanted one for stabilization? I didn't really do any long exposures, so I didn't need those longer shutter speeds. And because there's that excess of light, you can shoot at those deep apertures and still have fast shutter speeds. So you don't really need a tripod at all in that sense. How many camera bodies would you recommend taking? Ideally, I would take two. You could probably, if you've only got one, you could definitely do, like a 28 to 200 or some of those like super zooms. I liked having two, just in case something goes wrong. But then also, you can get those faster apertures if you want. So say you did want a 2.8, you have the option to do that. It also means that you can like shoot one thing here and then shoot one thing there. I was shooting photo and video, so I was swapping back and forwards a lot. But if you were just doing stills, Ben, I think like one would probably be fine. With climate change becoming a global concern, are there any subtle changes you've noticed in Antarctica that the rest of the world might not be aware yet? It was my first trip, so I don't really have anything to compare it to. But definitely from what I heard from others, like the impacts of krill fishing and overfishing in general, more iceberg, basically like breaking off from the glaciers. So that's becoming a lot more common. Larger icebergs breaking off. Sydney, she was one of the glaciologists on board. She basically did a full presentation on about how the warmer water is sinking underneath the ice shelf and then going into the actual under the underside of the Antarctic continent itself and wearing away the rock and heating the ice from underneath. So it's very hard to quantify without doing the research and very hard to see without being there. But hearing from professionals and industry leaders like I bet that work in this field, it is definitely a noticeable thing. I haven't missed anything, have I? Do you suffer from imposter syndrome there? Yes, absolutely, and I still suffer from it every day in a crippling, debilitating way. It is difficult because the photographers that do work on board and already work with these companies, they've worked with Nat Geo, they've worked with the likes of Paul Nicklin, incredible wildlife conservation photographers, and being in a room with people that they live and work in Antarctica on the regular, it is kind of eye-opening, and you understand that running workshops in Sydney and doing the whole Sony thing, you have kind of like a you're in a position where you're coming into contact with lots of other people and people are asking you questions because you're potentially seen as an authority figure in like the Sony world, and then stepping out of that world and you become a very small fish. I really enjoyed that process. Did I feel prepared going enough into it? I did a bit of research, but I kind of wanted to be surprised in the sense that I knew what I needed to take. I knew what I needed to be safe. But in terms of understanding where we were going, the history, a lot of that stuff, I deliberately didn't do my research because I wanted to learn and grow and enjoy the experience and really soak it all in while I was there, as opposed to reading it all first and then being there and kind of being like, oh, I knew that. Oh, I knew that. I feel like that would have detracted a little bit from the experience. Am I planning to go again or creating a tour plan? I would love to go again. Some of the other Sony advocates are. I think Robin, Craig, Andrew, a couple of the others are going. So that's a trip through Chimu. That's a partner with Intrepid. So it's basically the same crew, same people. I would love to go again, absolutely. But it is kind of eye-opening, coming back and being like, oh, should people really be going? Maybe, probably not. But if you have the opportunity to go, absolutely go. Did I take a GoPro and put it in the water? I didn't. I don't own a GoPro, but a lot of people did, and they got some really cool stuff of the leopard seals like under the water and them playing underneath the Zodiacs. All right. Any final questions? Questions, queries, doubtful points? And then we'll probably wrap it up. What did I enjoy more, taking photos or videos? I think the photos are more powerful, but the process of shooting video was very exciting, as in like you get to witness something live in front of you and then being able to watch it like back is really something special. If you have the opportunity to go watch my YouTube video of the trip, you can see bubble net feeding, see some whales raising their flukes. You can see some of the bird life. You get a better understanding of what you actually see with your own eyes while you're there, which is pretty cool. The body has not moved, heart already far. Cool. Can you use a drone? No, you cannot. It would be very cool. The scientists from the University of Santa Cruz and University of California / the WWF, they had special permits, so they were allowed to fly. But for us mere mortals, no, not allowed to fly a drone there without the right scientific permits. I'll just wait a minute and see if anything else comes in. Before we wrap up, for everyone that's here now, if you haven't drop your name in the chat so I know that you're here, make sure you do that now so I can sign you in and make sure that you get a ticket into the draw for the Greece trip on behalf of Sony. So if you're in the chat if you're in this live stream right now and you haven't already dropped your name, if your YouTube name doesn't match, just make sure you do it now and I'll tick you off and say, yes, they were here. They get a ticket into the draw. Oh, sweet. There we go. Can I take you through culling 1,000 to 40? I'm a wedding photographer by trade, so it's a bit far stretch from Antarctica. But if you've got two images and they're almost identical, you choose you choose the best one. Delete the other. You don't need it. So I have a pretty brutal culling process in the sense that, if I took 30 photos of a leopard seal, I select maybe the best 1 to 2, delete everything else, don't need it. Especially if the composition's very similar, I would be quite brutal with my culling. Some people use AI programs and so on, especially in the wedding photography industry, but I think for this kind of thing, you do need to go through it yourself and kind of make your own selects. The gallery of the whole Antarctic trip, I've posted nearly all of my favorite photos to Instagram. So if you go for a scroll, you can kind of see, like, out of the thousands of photos I took, what are the final kind of, 30, 40 that really stood out to me. I would keep 30 to 40 from each section of the day. But in terms of the actual ones that I want on my website or I want on my portfolio or what I'm actually posting to Instagram, it's a much smaller piece of the pie. What elements, Darcy's asked, what elements do you think will inspire your future work? Ooh, I definitely want to do more conservation photography and a lot more wildlife photography. My partner's, like I said earlier, she's a biologist and ecologist, and I'd love to be like a power couple where she does the science and I take the photos, or vice versa. She takes photos now as well, and she's already quickly becoming better than me. So I'd love to be like a dream team, like a power couple. That's the goal. Shoot more wildlife, do more science. Everyone's got 2 minutes left to ask their final questions. I'm just signing the last couple of people in to make sure I got everyone. We're already a power couple. She's downstairs waiting for me right now. Any final questions about the experience? It could be about your own travels, shooting in a cold environment, things like that. Fire away. Otherwise, we'll wrap up in a couple of seconds. Oh, it is pretty late in New Zealand. Thank you so much for staying around. Much appreciated. I'll let you get to bed. You mentioned culling AI software. I would be interested in knowing more about them. There's one program called Aftershoot. It is really tailored towards portrait and weddings, unfortunately, because it'll cull through your images and find ones that are out of focus or if people's eyes are closed and things like that. But it's called Aftershoot. I'll write it in the thing here if you're interested. Just put it in a comment. That's the program. I think they just moved they used to charge per image, and now they've just got like a regular subscription plan. I don't personally use it, but I know a lot of people that do. Darcy's just replied, "Oh, I appreciate that. Keen to see what you do next." Thank you so much. I hope everyone had like a lot of fun hearing me just ramble about the trip. Um, and I hope you're excited to get stuck into some of your own travels. Do you know what temperature gear freezes at? Most of the Sony gear is rated down to approximately -40, which is a lot. That's actually like totally freezing. Um, as far as I know a bunch of Sony cameras that have been up Everest and were completely fine. Lithium ion is the real issue. So lithium ion stops operating at its optimal, performance level when it gets cold. Also, when it gets really hot. So batteries in phones will die really quickly. Batteries in cameras will die pretty quickly. I didn't have that issue. I don't think it's nearly cold enough to warrant that. I would go out and shoot for 2 hours and I would still come back with, 60% battery. So battery life was not a problem. All right. Let's wrap it up. It's been an hour and a half. I probably bored everyone already, but thanks so much, everyone, for coming. I really do appreciate it. I love sharing my experience, and I hope you get a lot out of this. Obviously, big thanks on behalf of myself and obviously Sony as well. Hope you all get that your tickets into the next into the Greece trip. I'd love to see you there. Go to lots more Sony events. There's so much on in October. We had this really big push to kind of get as many events up and running as we could for the Sony Scene Festival. The people that do this on behalf of Sony, they're some of the nicest, most talented photographers and filmmakers that I know. I learn something from them every single time. Going to scene events isn't just about getting cool shots and playing with Sony cameras. A lot of it is just making friends in the industry, building a community, and really learning from people that, when I looked at the photos that were in the Sony Alpha Awards from the advocates and ambassadors, like some of those images are just mind blowing. And you really understand like why those people are kind of like community leaders, so to speak. But yeah, I'm very humbled to kind of like consider myself amongst them, considering the talent and the expertise in their field. Like it is really something special. So get to lots of events, chat to the advocates, learn from them. They love sharing. I love sharing. And yeah, that's pretty much my wrap up. Thanks everyone for coming and enjoy the rest of your night.